Hello! Welcome to this week's book review video. Today we're going to be discussing a very underwhelming novella that I read recently that I have a relatively low opinion about. But I feel like it illustrates several things I've wanted to talk about on this channel. And that novella, unfortunately named novella, The Ballad of Ballard and Sandrine, which has to go down the books, at least for me, as one of the worst titled works of fiction I've ever read. The Ballad of Ballard and Sandrine does not roll off the tongue very easily. I was very excited to give Peter Straub a try. I've heard a lot of good things about him. I've heard him compared to Stephen King as a more literary version of Stephen King. But also, a lot of his books are rather long and very popular, so they're a little bit harder to get a hold of from the library, especially since he recently passed away. So I picked up The Ballad of Ballard and Sandrine because it was available and also was short. I didn't want to invest too much time into an author I wasn't too familiar with. And I think that was a mistake. I don't think this novella was written very well. Peter Straub does a very good job at creating a very terrifying atmosphere for the reader. His character work is also very good. It's very literary, lots of symbolism. But I really feel like this story was cramped. There wasn't enough wiggle room. There wasn't enough details that helped me build some empathy for our protagonist. Horror without empathy isn't good horror. It's just hack and slash. There's no emotional connection. It reminds me of when I was growing up. We had a lot of pet snakes. And you feed snakes rodents. In my family, we fed our snakes live rodents. And there's a lot of conflicting emotions going on when you're watching a snake feed. Sure, you're excited to watch a snake coil around something and swallow it whole. It's monstrous, it's compelling, and it's hard to look away from. But unless you're a sociopath, you feel a little bit of empathy for the rodent. Maybe the snake isn't hungry. Maybe the rodent gets to live another day. And you kind of feel hopeful. You feel some empathy because we're human. We're designed and we evolved to feel empathy for other creatures. And a good horror book is just like watching a snake circle around its tank and stalk a rodent. The plot follows our two unlikable protagonists, Ballard and Sandrine, two unlikable lovers who seem to be trapped on a never-ending riverboat cruise through the Amazon. But it gets creepier. They seem to be alone on the ship. They don't know who's sailing the ship. They don't know who's setting the tables, who's cleaning up after them. And it's a very unsettling, very atmospheric read. Our protagonists are victims in a horror story, have the odds stacked against them. And that builds empathy for the reader. But The Ballad of Ballard and Sandrine could not make me feel empathy for the protagonists. They are crude, they are unlikable, they are icky, they are despicable. And I'm not quite sure if the evil powers they are up against are more evil than them. So I kind of felt myself rooting for something bad to happen to our protagonists. Whether that was Peter Straub's intent, I'm not sure. But for me, good horror cannot be done when you want the monster to win. And so that made this read, even though it was very short, very tiresome, because I was waiting for something to happen, waiting to feel some inkling of empathy for our protagonist, and that never came. Is The Ballad of Ballard and Sandrine written very well? Yes, it's very literary. Peter Straub is a wonderful writer. He makes a very beautiful, unsettling atmosphere. So while The Ballad of Ballard and Sandrine was written very well, and the atmosphere was very unsettling, very uncomfortable, very horrifying, I really feel like the meat and potatoes of this story weren't satisfying enough to make it compelling, to not even warrant a reread. And a reread is definitely warranted because the story is confusing and ends in a very ambiguous way. And I can't bring myself to even go back and read through it again, even some key passages, because I wasn't invested. I didn't feel empathy for the characters. And good horror just can't be done in this way. The Ballad of Ballard and Sandrine is scary. It is creepy. It is unsettling. It is disturbing. More than any of those things, it is gross. And amongst the various emotions and reactions a horror author is trying to elicit in the reader, disgust is the cheapest of experiences because it's shallow. At the end of the day, The Ballad of Ballard and Sandrine made me feel icky and unsatisfied. And that's just not how you're supposed to feel after you finish any book, especially a book in the horror genre. So while I think Peter Straub is an amazing author, I'm going to have to give him another try in one of his more highly acclaimed books. And I'm starting to understand why this book on Goodreads had a bunch of 1-star reviews and a bunch of 5-star reviews. And I'm convinced that the 5-star reviews are from super fans that think anything that Peter Straub touches is amazing. But I do think 1-star reviews are a little harsh because it's very hard for me to give a book a 1-star review. Because there's a lot of things that are done well. But at the end of the day, I really just feel like The Ballad of Ballard and Sandrine was unfinished. And I feel like this was not the right topic to tackle in a novella because there's so many questions that I needed to be answered. And they'll never be answered. And this book was not good enough to warrant a reread. And I'm not quite sure if anything about the plot clears up on a reread. And that's just not how you're supposed to feel when you finish a book. So would I recommend The Ballad of Ballard and Sandrine to anybody? Probably not. The story is unfinished. It is unsatisfying. And it is icky. And perhaps the story makes more sense when I read the rest of Peter Straub's work. I'm not sure if his bibliography takes place in a shared universe. Perhaps that would make this story make a lot more sense. But I don't believe that's the case. So I think I'm going to rate The Ballad of Ballard and Sandrine a 2 out of 5 stars because I've never given a book a 1-star rating before. But this is amongst the worst works of fiction I've ever read in terms of giving me a cathartic reading experience. And I would tell you guys to steer clear of it. Thank you for watching my video. If you liked it, push that little thumbs up icon. Subscribe to my channel if you want to hear me talk about any other books. And I'll see you guys next time.